Welcome to the Beach Thinker, episode 54. My name is Jamil Raymond. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, as always. On this week's episode, we are going to go through part 2 of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, a fantastic book about trying to help young men, and men of all ages, discover their mature masculine psyches. Fantastic book. We talked about it last week. Talked about the king and accessing the king energy. What is it? Who they are? What are the shadows of the king? This week we'll be focusing on the warrior, which is one of the more embodied and the more easily identifiable mature masculine energies, but it is maligned. Is maligned the word? Yeah, maligned in modern society. So we're going to kick things off straight off the bat. Going to change the order a little bit because I think it makes a little bit more sense the way I do it this time as opposed to last week. But without further ado, there was some further ado when I fucked that part up, but that's okay. We move on. Without further ado, let's go through part 2, the warrior. So, what is the warrior? Who is the modern warrior? I think today's warrior is largely missing, like a lot of the everyday, mature, masculine energies that we so seek in society. We think of warriors, and often we think of the violent brute, we think of the heartless, peon, a soldier of fortune, a destructive force. It's often the shadows of what a warrior is, that heartlessness, that violence, is what is displayed through us, through the media, through war, and the general disdain we have for the masculine in today's society by that resorting to violence. But what we often miss, I think, in today's society is the light and the positive aspects of what a warrior can be, particularly around the energies of self-discipline and piety. The dedication to a higher cause or a higher practice. Right? This is what enables a quality warrior, and you'll see and understand the difference between the mature warrior and the immature hero, which you think would be, a masculine archetype or a mature masculine archetype, the hero, but it's not, and we'll explain why further down the line. But with this discernment, not this discernment, but this pushing away of what a modern warrior could entail, a lot of that has been pushed away by modern society and the conveniences that it offers and the products that it sells to solve these spiritual and value-based problems that we have in society, right? You don't have to do hard work, get rich quick, right? You don't have to go through the effort of improving your mind or your body. Just take this pill and everything will solve itself, right? Things like the man shake or any fucking sort of get rich quick scheme, pyramid schemes, anything that takes you away from that calling to be disciplined, that have that inner locus of integrity, of linearity, of discipline, really. It is a very disciplined trait to be a warrior, and we'll explain and expand on that shortly. A second part of that is the lack of this higher purpose, this higher cause, this disconnection from the divine. Today's ecosystem, today's society has been dominated by the downtrodden and the stepping away from religion defining our ethics and morals, which has its benefits, absolutely. And there is this idea of agnostic and atheism, which is again valid depending on what your perspective is. But the modern world is so focused on the material and the current and the now and the reactive. That's what it's there to do. That's what the ego function is, amplified 1,000 times through the consciousness of media and a lot of people living in these egoic and reactive and survival states, is that they don't need to connect to God because they feel disconnected from themselves. And within that, they don't believe that there is something out there looking out for them, empowering them, giving them guidance towards an authentic path to an authentic self. But understanding the warrior energy, it has moved the most force across human history. The instinct for battle and for war is inescapable in humanity, right? Testosterone makes you want to do two things: fight and fuck. And that's been proven. But conflict, war, the common associations that we have with society, with the warrior energy, is what has transformed civilizations. We have used the force and the energy of the warrior to change the face of society, to shift from Eastern to Western culture. You think about any war, any holy war, from the jihadis of the last 15, 20 years in Islam to the Crusades, right? A lot of this warrior energy has been aligned with a transpersonal commitment to country or God, but still a higher purpose and a higher power. And that inner higher power, that inner integrity with their actions, is one of the key driving forces of warrior energy, for better or for worse. Now, the masculine, men in particular, we obsess with warrior energy. We channel it in all forms of our self-improvement. It's warrior energy is probably the most aligned to the aspect of discipline. But, we really mentally masturbate our own capabilities as warriors. We love to see it on the screen. We love to see it embodied in our sports stars and anyone we look up to. But if you think about today's average man, they're pretty toothless. They're flabby. They're undisciplined, right? It's a lot of, yes, the warrior lifestyle is something that we feel within us, but have not felt enabled to enact upon in our lives day to day. When you think about, the average problem or the societal problem that you see around the toothlessness of men and the over-feminization of society that we've seen over the last 15 to 20 years. So, even though we think that we're warriors and we pretend to be heroes, most of us live in cowardice, which is the passive pole of the warrior and the hero immature archetype, right? How many of us do truly stand up what we believe in? How many of us embody the qualities of a warrior? Of, what does a healthy warrior look like? What do we understand it to be? And we'll go through some of those archetypes now. There's something around mastery and discipline and focus, determination to a higher cause. These are all the archetypes, all the elements of a healthy, mature warrior. And we'll dig into that into a sec. But one of the interesting things about warrior energy and the development into the full mature warrior is actually considering the immature warrior is the hero. Now, that's quite contrary to what you would think about what a hero is. We use heroes in all of our stories or our narratives. The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell is a common parable for individuals to live the narrative of their life and their true identities in the process of self-actualization. But what we find with the hero is a certain level of immaturity and a degree of naivety, right? The youth aspect of the hero is what often undoes the capacities of what the hero is, because it lacks discipline and it's a little bit overexcited, probably a little overconfident, potentially arrogant about its own capabilities. Now, the hero is associated with courage, and absolutely a hero will have the courage to jump into battle. But the naivety of his capability, of his tactics, of his strategy is what prevents him from maturing into the warrior. And then also, because he often lacks what we call a transpersonal commitment or a higher cause, he's often serving his own ego in the pursuit of whatever he believes to be righteous in what he's going for, saving the princess, solving a problem, helping the needy, etc. And because he doesn't have something to ground himself through a higher power, this lack of humility and the lack of knowing his limitations and this ego that he drives from often is the source of his undoing. And often what we see with heroes and with every other immature masculine archetype is an over attachment to the feminine. Now, what does that mean? Usually, when we are overly attached to the feminine, particularly for men, one of our greatest challenges is the feminine, right? And that could be distraction, that can be a degree of comfort and softness, and I don't want to say this in a negative light, because we definitely need to integrate our feminine, which we do in the lover archetype, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. But it's really about becoming your own man, living out of the shadows and of the safety of your parents and the support systems of development, and then charting your own course in life. What we also often don't see when the hero saves the princess is his ability to love the princess wholly. And you never think about what's next. You never think, does he have a mastery of the feminine? Does he incorporate a mature aspect to embrace the feminine? Or does he want to keep living out his boyish adventures and keep serving himself instead of serving the higher purpose? And, potentially the higher purpose that can be found in his woman. Now, you think the idea is you would have the skills to do so, but what happens with the feminine and the hero issue is that after a while, a lot of heroes that get the princess don't know how to keep them, because if they don't understand what the higher cause is and the purpose that they've got behind what they're doing, they may lose that polarity and attraction from their partners, from the feminine, whoever they have saved, because of that lack of higher cause, higher commitment. Because ideally, if the hero is acting in valor, in chivalry, that's the higher value and the higher cause that energizes him to get the work done. But if he lets go of that valor and that commitment to good and that aspect of self-discipline, he's going to lose the polarity that the feminine was attracted to in the first place when he came to save her, right? We talked about this similarly last week, where in the book Way of the Superior Man by David Data, one of his key facets to core masculinity is that your purpose must come before your woman, right? A deeply spiritual man, a man that is connected to God and Source, isn't limited to the materialistic aspects or the more simplistic aspects of the earth around him, right? He is connected to that greater source, that greater power, to God, to the divine, much like the feminine is in their own way as well, where we as men like to sit in stillness and are grounded and are firm in our channeling of energy to source and to God through meditation, through reflection, through what's it called? Not independence, solitude. There it is. As opposed to the feminine that channels a divine energy through movement and through enrichment, through dance, through feeling, right? The waves of the feminine, as opposed to the rigidity of the masculine. So we have this hero, and you might be challenged as to why a hero might be an immature aspect. We've talked about why that is, but where can the hero go wrong in their energies? What are the active and the passive shadows of the hero? So the active shadow of the hero is the grandstander bully. And this is, the depths, the hyperactive hero, a guy that is out to show off and save the day for his own looks and his own brand, and to just feel good about himself. He's not serving that higher purpose, that higher perspective. He is not in service to that higher power. And he's probably lacking that inner locus of maturity, of discipline. And just like anyone else that's in these unstable core positions, will lash out at anyone that tries to challenge their perspective, And, that's where the sadistic elements of the warrior can come in, the heartlessness, right? He will get in the face of anyone that challenges his grandeur, his perspective, his flair. A great example of what a grandstander bully looks like from the book is actually Goose from Top Gun, which is Tom Cruise's character. He's the hot shot, too cool for school attitude. He's flashy in the jet, but eventually his attitude, his grandstanding costs, one of the lives of one of his team members. And that's when he's grounded to earth and, made to realize that he ain't all that fucking flash if he's not willing to serve the people around him, which is what you want in a good soldier in the Air Force. The other side of the passive pole of the archetypes, the shadow archetypes, is the coward. And, a coward speaks for itself. We've all been a coward at some point. We are passive, we are weak, we can't stand up for ourselves. We don't rise to the occasion. We do not channel courage in our everyday lives. We don't have potentially that transpersonal commitment to God or a higher power. We're probably stuck in some pretty negative or shallow cycles and probably don't have a lot of self-belief. And again, like we talked about last week, any of these negative spirals or shadows and these passive energies, they can either destroy us or the pressure will build so much that we flip and then we become hyperactive into the active shadow. We become a grandstander or a bully, or even worse, we go to that sadistic element of a shadow warrior, which we'll talk about in a sec. The sadistic warrior, who inflicts pain under the guise of their own self-righteousness, and there's that disconnected, heartless individual. So we've talked about the shadow and the immature elements of the hero. Let's dig a little bit deeper into what a healthy warrior looks like, and we can sort of discern the development path between the hero and the warrior. So, a warrior, he is a master. He is strategic, he works with his limitations, he utilizes his mind more than his courage. He's more grounded in reality and more connected to God, right? Which is a paradox within itself, but most of the world exists in these paradoxes, right? The higher purpose usually comes from some sort of master that enables the lifestyle. A lot of warriors, like knights, were, loyal to kings, to country, to God. And they usually are adhering, if not to one of those, at least a set path or a set code in life, right? It might be the Tao. It might be, I think it's called the Do in samurai culture. But again, this connection to something outside themselves minimizes their self-aggrandization, their self-perspective, and it sort of minimizes what they feel is necessary to act upon in their lives, because the values that they adhere to and aspire to, and then again that mastery of self, those are what's more important than the minutiae and the bullshitting and the bitching that can occur in everyday life. By honing into what they, in their cause, believe is important, that fetters away the unsubstantial. Now, that can work in two directions, right? Once in the positive direction, this is where that focus and that discipline and something like stoicism could come into play here, right? Marcus Aurelius, as well as being a philosopher, was an emperor. He was in charge of armies and he led wars and he did conquer lands. By utilizing these codes and channeling that warrior energy, a lot of what Stoicism is based around warrior energy, the art of self-mastery, practicing discipline and temperance and justice and courage. These are all elements of the warrior. Outside of this higher purpose and this self-discipline is a degree of alertness, this evaluation, this stillness to reflect and comprehend and be more strategic about their actions. The immature hero jumps into battle with vital energy, and full of vigor. And so does the warrior, but he is more tempered. He is more strategic. Who is it? Musashi, I forgot his first name, but the Japanese legendary warrior Musashi wrote the Book of Five Rings. His style of fighting was based around removing what is unnecessary from combat. And this is a guy that won over 60 duels from like 13 to like 35 or something like that. Something ridiculous. He was a master of his craft, but he was so intentful about the way that he moved with efficiency, with practicality. Again, having the clarity and the consciousness to remove what is unnecessary from even a technique, an art, a perspective of combat. Really applying warrior energy into the act of war itself. Pretty powerful stuff. And that alertness, that groundedness comes from maturity. It comes from the limitation of your humanity and the imminence of death, right? Being faced with your mortality is grounding, right? The hero jumps into battle with not a lot of regard for his own life, and that can cost them dearly. The warrior has fought many battles, has faced death many times, has seen how maybe, contemporaries, friends, other soldiers, other warriors have fallen due to a lack of discipline or consistency or action or strategy. Right? These masters have seen the consequence of not having discipline and focus in their lives. Speaking of discipline, that's another key element of the warrior. He is extremely disciplined, focused, honed in on the next best action, on mastering their skills, training with accuracy and depth. This is where the masculine really loves to hone themselves and chip themselves down into that craft. Again, we talked about Alexis Carrel, man cannot suffer. Man cannot grow without suffering, because he is both the sculptor and the marble. This adherence to chipping away at the marble to sculpt who you are, that is another embodiment of the warrior energy, that will to keep hammering in the face of pain, to hone yourself into a practical, lethal, fighting, killing machine, whatever you need to be. But it's also about balance, right? It's not just about being a ruthless killing machine. A warrior wants to be balanced. They want to be well-rounded. Because of this grounding, because of this understanding of humility and their limitations, they understand that they need to be fantastic generalists and be broad about what they can do and say, because that flexibility and that capability to think strategically, think about that next best move. It's not just about jumping head first. There's strategy, there's tactics involved with a great warrior. Most great generals and leaders in battles are warriors, not the soldiers themselves that go in and run in. Even a good soldier is empowered with knowledge and tactics to use on the field when necessary, and has the necessary judgment to know when to attack, when to defend, when to run away, when to fight, and from a different perspective. Again, that hero jumps in both feet. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And another major point that we've talked about is the aesthetic element of the warrior, not aesthetic, the aesthetic. They're sort of detached, right? You're sort of lone wolfish is, you're really just wholly and solely solitary in the pursuit of your own self-mastery, a little bit detached from the world, just focusing on the path, again, disregarding things that they do not feel is necessary to their warrior's path, to their code, and to their ethos. Again, this can work in two ways, this detachment. This detachment is what enables the lack of distraction and the enablement of discipline, right? To sort of push, the emotions aside that might distract or take us away from what is required and what the job is in front of us. But when that goes wrong, that's when we go into that sadistic shadow, that destructive force where they can work and live in cruel manners without consideration for the humanity or the consideration of others in the way that they operate. That's a great way to talk about the archetypes, the shadow of the warrior. We just talked about the sadist. This is what we understand and what we see so often in society. The negative and shadow aspects of the warrior is that destructive, heartless force, often associated with violence, right? Often associated with cruelty. But a warrior, in its fullness, knows that it has to destroy things in order for things to rejuvenate, to realign. Right? It understands that there is order and there is cyclical natures to how we operate, and it chooses to destroy what antagonizes the common good or the higher order, or understands that the destructive cycle is just part of the new growth cycle later on. But this is where do we see the sadist? This is what we see in the media every day. This is where we see, soldiers and war come to fruition. This is when you see things like A Clockwork Orange. Is it Clockwork Orange? No. What was that? I forgot that movie. Full Metal Jacket. Sorry, Full Metal Jacket, where you see the heartlessness, the cruelty of war. These men that are being conditioned into ruthless, cold, killing machines. This is the dark side of the military that you hear about, doing ridiculous experiments. Like, for example, the Nazis did it in the 40s, with experimenting with testosterone and meth, and doing disgusting experiments on people and animals to try and find new, expansive ways to wage war. Again, that is the warrior energy in its extremely active shadow, in its most sadistic path. Now, on a more lighter note, there was a great extract in the book that talked about compulsive personality disorder, which I thought was really interesting because I just basically aligned to it a fucking lot. So the book says, although we may all become vulnerable to the sadistic warrior at some time or another, there is a particular personality type that has this energy in spades, as we say. This is the compulsive personality disorder. Compulsive personalities are workaholics, consistently with their noses to the grindstone. They have a tremendous capacity to endure pain, and they often manage to get an enormous amount of work done. But what is driving their non-stop engines is deep anxiety, the hero's desperation. They have a very slim grasp on a sense of their own worthwhileness. It's a weird word. They don't know what it is they really want, what they are missing and would like to have. They spend their lives attacking everything and everyone, their jobs, their life tasks before them, themselves and others. In the process, they are eaten alive by the sadistic warrior and soon reach burnout. And then to expand on that, salespeople and teachers, along with members of the many other professions already cited, can easily fall prey to compulsive, self-driven workaholic patterns. Eventually, they will snap. And that hit me like a fucking ton of bricks. Because that is me to a fucking T. And again, that's the reality. That's why I found so much value in this book in many elements, is that I have been a workaholic. I've done a shitload of work over the last 3 years. I have been distracted by dominant warrior and magician energies over the last few years. I compulsively work. Last year I was working, 80 hours plus a week on all these different degrees and different projects and different ideas, just spinning so many different plates. And the further that I got away from the inner core of what I found valuable to the business and what I was meant to adhere to, when I stuck away from that focus of the warrior, the more I overloaded myself And then the more I eventually burnt out, and the more that I felt that sadistic pull of just, plowing on, just getting shit done. Now, the passive pole of the shadow warrior is the masochist. And that is the guy who doesn't know when to quit. This is the one who suffers for the higher cause, but doesn't know when to say it's enough, right? They might be highly and compulsively tolerant, but they're slowly breaking down from from the inside. And then eventually, again, like we've said, like any other passive pole, they will eventually just outburst in a reflection of their own inability to self-regulate themselves, or just completely break down entirely. And I've lived on both sides of this pole quite often over the last couple of years, and that's why I found it was so relatable. Is that not to say that I didn't know what I was working towards when I created these businesses, but the idea that these were, I guess, just compulsive, just needing to get things done, definitely aligning and identifying my self-worth based on my capacity to produce things and to work. And I've had to definitely take that back a step and focus on understanding my self-worth, not my wealth as an individual to others, not as a unit of productivity, and not to just be of use to people as a leader, as a creator, as a salesperson, whatever role that I'm taking in various people's lives. And that's where this shadow can really overtake in a more thankfully self-immolation is what I'm trying to say, but I don't know what the active noun of immolative. Self-immolation, self-inflicted. There, why did I have to get so fucking fancy? It's because I took 2 alpha brain serum. Now my brain is cooking. But yes, I did not inflict sadistic tendencies onto others. But, one of the elements of sadism is a disdain for softness or to be weak. And that definitely came out of me onto other people. I can reflect on that for sure, where I would judge others and sort of put them down a little bit for not being as much of a workhorse as I was, right? But that was me in the shadow, unaware of the shadow itself, just thinking this is me in my newfound energy, my newfound purpose, trying to get shit done. And it's really unfortunate that I've had to do that, but again, we all do it. I'm willing to put my hand up. I did do that to others. Calling it out, being conscious and aware of it is the first step, and you sort of make your own peace and adjust your course from there. Now that you've realized, the unconscious elements of your life and your perspective that you're pushing onto others, and that's how you affect others. That's what we pass on when we talk about hurt people. It's often we are passing on shadow elements of ourselves to others. And then if that happens at a grand societal level, that's what we begin to accept as culture, right? When we see these broader elements of society that we don't like or don't align with, often that has just been compounded through action and passivity and a lack of resistance to those cultural anomalies. And because it just gets grandfathered in because nobody does anything about it, those are the negative elements that become part of the culture, right? Think of any dumb fad that's gone around, or smoking, for example, was accepted culture because no one took a stand up to it, and we didn't know any better at the time. So we've talked about how we see lots of maligned warriors in today's society. Where are the positive warriors? Where are the modern warriors that we can look up to in society today? And I think the best way to look at that is pretty much, in sport is probably the best examples we've got of warriors, right? We've got combat sports like the UFC and boxing, Most sports are based around competition and channeling warrior energy, a righteousness and a challenge beyond themselves, usually for the team. Elements of discipline and self-rigidity, working and honing their skills to mastery, strategy and tactics, right? And ideally, they don't end up in violent outbursts, right? They are controlled, and any level of destruction is necessary for the fruition of the next generation or to enable a better tomorrow. So now, hot topic right now, NBA, the playoffs. LeBron James would be a fucking great example of a modern day warrior, right? He plays his basketball now for his own legacy, which is still a bit self-serving, but he also does give back to the community. But he is about chasing greatness. He has made strategic moves to teams and the way he runs his career, like moving to the Cavaliers to respect his hometown, and then moving to the Lakers to further the brand and his own personal cause. He's very highly disciplined in his approach to his training, and then again has that humility to understand his limitations. He's been playing basketball for 20 years. LeBron spends $1.5 million a year on recovery alone, right? He understands that his body needs rest and needs to recover. If he needs to maintain performance over this period of time, he's not just going gung-ho and just jumping on an ice bath. He's got to spend a significant amount of money to maintain the efficient machine that is capable of producing what is probably close to $1 billion worth of value through brand deals and the NBA itself and pushing the brand out itself. Understanding his limitations, moving from the hero to the warrior. Where do we see the hero in sports? Someone like a Nick Kyrgios, for example, someone that is very confident of their own abilities, a little bit blinded by their own limitations, jumps wholeheartedly into the arena with seemingly little to no plan. You can see that difference in maturity. That's when you can see the archetypes really play out between the hero and the warrior. And that's it for this episode, guys. Wanted to be really focused about it because I do think this is a lot of fun, and I just want to get a little bit sharper at it. Hopefully, you get a little bit of understanding about yourself. Where are you the warrior? Where are you the hero? Where do you need to be more disciplined? Do you need a higher channel to God? Again, give this book a plug. King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. We've got 2 more weeks of this fantastic book. Get it on Amazon, $25 by Robert Moore or Douglas Gillette. Really, really recommend it. Next week, we'll be talking about The Magician, which is another of my personal favorites because I am a full-on magician, and you'll understand why when we go through the episode. All the usual stuff, guys. Like, share, subscribe. Get on the YouTubes. Give us a comment. All that good stuff. At Jamil J. Raymond on all the socials if you want to hit me up. And that's it. I'll see you again next week, bingers. Thank you for your time and attention. Ciao for now.